much. So yeah, in the 21st century, soccer is a popular pastime bordering on an obsession in the state of Oregon. Since joining Major League Soccer in 2011, the Portland Timbers have sold out every home match that they've played at Providence Park. Likewise, the Portland Thorns have led attendance in the National Women's Soccer League since their inception in 2013, regularly drawing 2 to 3 times the number of fans that other clubs bring in WSL matches. And because it's such a popular sport in Oregon, this spring, the Providence Park is completing a 4,000-seat expansion to meet demand for tickets. Now, this passion is hardly something new in Oregon. Even looking back before the original Portland Timbers franchise was founded as an expansion club in the North American Soccer League in 1975, the sport boasts more than a century of history in the state. In the decades prior to World War I, the sport occupied a prominent role in the social fabric for both adults and youth in various communities around the state. This paper pieces together a better understanding of how soccer evolved in the Pacific Northwest, branching out from the Columbia River. Soccer's cascading fortunes in Oregon help provide a better understanding of the influence and the limitations of the state's 2 largest cities of the late 19th century, Portland and Astoria, to spread the growth of a popular pastime not only among the Columbia River communities, but also further throughout the state by the onset of World War I. Now, looking at these 2 cities, the rivalry between them grew out of their desire to become an international hub for commercial exchange. As early as 1889, Astoria was already boasting of itself as the deep-sea port of Oregon, and had placed in the Portland Oregonian newspaper, as well as other publications. But while it dreamed of becoming the northern equivalent of San Francisco, Astoria was consistently overshadowed, both in terms of population and commercial investment, by its rival to the southeast. During the final years of the 19th century, Astoria grew into the 2nd largest city in Oregon. The population more than doubled between 1880 and 1890, as the city's fishing, canning, and sawmill industries rapidly expanded. The city boomed thanks to the growth of its various maritime and timber industries and its position, as they like to boast, as the only deep water port in the state. By the early 1890s, the construction of a long-desired railroad increased Astoria's commercial fortunes further. Much like any great rivalry throughout the soccer world, sport was only a small part of what drove the competition between the 2 cities. Unlike many derbies around the globe, though, the matches between the Portlanders and the Astoria Football Club that transpired in the 1890s did not develop major enmity between players or supporters. Clubs from the 2 cities operated in an environment of mutual respect rather than any underlying hostility. Now, looking at this club, in September 1890, a group of American and English residents in Astoria congregated at the Armory Hall to form this club and begin arranging competition. That same autumn, the first soccer league launched up the Columbia in Portland. Around the same time, clubs were also developing in nearby communities such as Seaside, Fort Canby, and Ilocos on both sides of the border. The proliferation of clubs in the region increased the opportunities available for Astoria's soccer players to test their mettle in inter-city matches against other teams situated along the Columbia. Now, before moving on, it is important to note that the word football is used interchangeably by the 19th century press to describe both the kicking game we know as soccer as well as the gridiron game. So how do we know that these are actually examples of soccer that we're seeing in the press? Well, quite simply, thanks to rosters printed in local media, we can see clearly that this is soccer. For instance, the presence of 2 goalkeepers, a position that's never existed in American football, really tips us off to this. So understanding that what we're looking at is soccer here, we see that representative sides from Astoria and Portland allegedly first met for a soccer match in 1892. However, we have no concrete evidence of this in any newspapers from either Portland or Astoria. It's only later allusions to this 1892 match that occur. And we see it pop up throughout other match coverage in the 1890s, but we don't know anything about that first match specifically, at least what we have on record. What we do have documentation about, though, are a pair of matches that took place in the summer and autumn of 1893 between the Astoria Football Club and then representative side from Portland. They put together this home and away series in a way that really demonstrated the rising popularity of the sport. Portland sent a team to its sister city on the Columbia for a July 22nd match against the Astoria Football Club at Smith's Point, just outside the city. The team boarded the T.J. Potter, a 230-foot wooden steamship launched 5 years earlier in Portland that was at the time among the fastest boats on the Columbia River. Portland donned black and blue despite the hot afternoon, and several hundred spectators flocked to Smith's Point for the contest, hoping that the home side could pull out a win over the more experienced Portlanders. While the Portland players had been together longer, Astoria proved itself the better conditioned and more individually skilled team. However, soccer has never been solely an individual game, and Portland simply proved the better team on the day as they went to win 2-1. 3 months after losing to Portland at home, the members of the Astoria Football Club, along with a congregation of over 100 fans, headed up the Columbia to square off against their intercity rival in an October 21st return match. They boarded the city of Frankfurt steamship as it headed up the river to Portland, and fans were able to take advantage of a special round-trip rate of $1.50, which was touted as the lowest rate that had ever been given for an excursion on the Columbia River. More than 100 individuals, as I said, took advantage of this special rate and were on the boat as it left the port in Astoria to the rousing support of a crowd of over 100 more who were behind on the dock to see the team away. Now, looking back a bit, what makes this match really significant is that 5 months earlier, in May 1893, the Multnomah Athletic Club signed a 5-year lease on an open field in the Goose Hollow neighborhood of Portland for $3,000. There, the members of the club constructed a grandstand along 18th Avenue, preparing to host spectator sports for the Portland public. The third match, against the visiting Astoria team, provided the inaugural public entertainment at the new site, as you see the same urban footprint where Providence Park now stands. Once the city of Frankfurt arrived at the docks in Portland on the morning of the match, the members of the team and the congregation of supporters traveled toward the new field. With several hundred spectators gathered at Multnomah Field, the largest crowd yet assembled for a soccer match in Portland witnessed a strong display from both sides. Both the Portlanders and the Astorians hoped that victory would earn them a chance to take on other West Coast powerhouses of the period, such as the San Francisco Thistles or the Victoria Wanderers up in British Columbia. The experience gained from the sport's growing popularity over the previous several years allowed Astoria to field a stronger team than had ever previously represented the city. Once the match began at 3 p.m., the Astoria side had the advantage of play early in the contest, playing a game that was very heavy on passing and light on long balls. The Astorians outplayed their hosts for much of the first half. But just as he had in the July match at Smith's Point in Astoria, Portland's goalkeeper pushed away every attempt that was coming in his goal. A controversial call by the referee allowed Portland to take a 1-0 lead at halftime, and this changed the entire complexion of the match. Minutes before the intermission, Portland claimed a foul that was granted despite protests from the Astoria players. It's something we see every match, and even now. But shortly after the host took the lead on this disputed penalty goal, the whistle sounded for the break. And once they returned to the field, the Astoria side lacked the motivation and pace that characterized their earlier play in the first half. Portland expanded the lead, either to 4-0, as claimed by the Daily Historian, or 5-0, as the Oregonian reported in Portland. Now, whether Portland scored 4 or 5 goals, the final score obviously reflected a decisive victory for the team that inaugurated Multnomah Field with a victory for Portland. The large crowd heartily applauded both sides, even as Astoria gamely fought on despite the disparity in talent. So through those first 2 years of competition between the sister cities on the Columbia, Portland won each of the first 3 contests, even as the vanquished party displayed a growing level of skill with each match. While the visiting side fell, though, The sport took root and expanded in Astoria and other communities at the mouth of the Columbia, while at the same time the popularity of soccer waxed and waned in Portland itself. The Multnomah Athletic Club and other clubs in Oregon's largest city increasingly turned to American football as the primary code practiced among the populace. Multnomah Field was inaugurated by hosting a soccer match, but it quickly evolved into a site for intercollegiate gridiron games as interest shifted in the city and soccer fell out of favor for a period. While fading interest in Portland ended the budding intercity rivalry between these two principal cities of the period, the sport remained popular in Astoria throughout the end of the 19th century and into the early 1900s. Soccer embedded in high schools in the Columbia River region of both Oregon and Washington before the end of the 19th century. This offered opportunities for younger players in these cities to gain an introduction to the sport and take part in competitive matches. The popularity of the game in Astoria was such that by the summer of 1893, other clubs were forming in the city. These included company teams, such as the club formed by employees of the Pacific Can Company. The proliferation of clubs expanded the chances for participation in the sport, though the pool of players that would continue to represent Astoria in inter-city competitions still derived predominantly from the member rolls of the Astoria Football Club. As that club expanded, membership grew to the point where it had to stop accepting new members younger than 16 years of age. As a result, the game began to expand into local schools with the support of the Astoria Football Club. Cheered on as a source of pride for the community, the local high school put together a team that was quickly established enough to begin challenging other teams across the border on the Washington side of the Columbia. Playing against teams from Fort Canby and Ilwaco in July 1895, the younger team offered, quote, the satisfaction of knowing that young and energetic players are growing up in the places of the old reliables, end quote. So, in this way, the Astoria Football Club and other company teams as well counted on continued interest in the sport and new talent coming up from the school ranks to enrich their rosters once these high schoolers graduated and entered the workforce. While the senior club provided a goal to which these young students could aspire. Those who defended the honor of Astoria on the field against all comers as high schoolers had the chance to continue doing so after graduation. Meanwhile, back in Portland, the Multnomah Athletic Club's grounds and grandstand increasingly hosted American football contests as soccer fell out of favor. When the association game returned to the city, it was actually nearby at the grounds of the Bishop Scott Academy, just across Burnside Street. Situated on the west side of 19th Street in the fashionable northwestern part of downtown Portland, the significance of the Bishop Scott Academy as a home for these early matches demonstrates another way in which scholastic institutions impacted the development of Oregonian soccer. Covering 38 lots in the growing downtown of Portland, the Bishop Scott Academy also maintained grounds at 24th and Vaughn that also offered ample space for practicing and hosting both soccer and football matches. The grounds themselves hosted city soccer matches until the school's closure in 1904. So beginning in October 1901, the athletic field of the Bishop Scott Academy took over for Multnomah Field as the site for soccer's reintroduction into this community. At the end of October, a team organized by the Seamen's Institute between British sailors from the ship Cleo and a local squad of players that were put together for the match by the Seamen's Institute took on a game at the Bishop Scott Academy grounds. The Seamen's Institute, organized at the residence of longtime Seamen's missionary William S. Fletcher, opened its reading room in November 1894 as an alternative to the many saloons in the city. Less a formal institution of learning than a place of refuge for sailors at port in the city, the Seamen's Institute provided a critical space to congregate and arrange entertainment. This soccer contest was billed as the first match of association football that has been arranged in Portland for several years. The Seamen's Institute lost 2-1 to this team comprised of sailors on Saturday, October 26th. Though they lost, the strong performance by the group led to a return match the following week that was won by the Seamen's Institute team. This victory led to the formation of a full-time team by the Siemens Institute that featured regularly over the subsequent winter, including Thanksgiving Day matches against a starting 11 organized by the local YMCA. Though the American Football Code had by then taken precedence among the Portland public, the reintroduction of soccer to the community was popular, and it did lead to further matches being hosted at the Bishop Scott Academy grounds. Soccer in the city was marked by the early 1900s with fluctuating periods of play as well, as the standard of 45 minutes per half that we know for soccer today was often truncated to 30 or even sometimes 20 minutes, as we see here. In this regard, the local rules in Portland mirrored the shorter periods that were implemented in places like St. Louis during the first decades of the 20th century, showcasing a uniquely American flavor to the sport and how it was played in American communities. Their matches at the Bishop Scott Academy grounds helped drum up interest at the school itself, which soon set about forming its own club to participate in the pastime against other Portland teams. With several athletes among the student body already familiar with the game, they organized in January 1902 and began practice ahead of spring play. I could go into this a lot more, so this is basically based around a chapter that I wrote for an anthology that's coming out on soccer in the United States before World War I. But really, what I want to take away from what I've been able to present here is that from its early growth in Oregon's two principal port cities, soccer retained support in Astoria and other towns there at the lower Columbia, while the public was less consistently interested in the sport, but whenever it was hosted in Portland, it did drum up interest and bring out crowds. What we find is that key locations for the sport found their first footing before the turn of the 20th century, such as we see Multnomah Field. World War I stunted the sport's growth somewhat, but local competitions continued to be contested long after this initial growth period. Popularity was not constant in the state or even within major cities like Portland, but the outgrowth of the initial teams and leagues presaged a lasting interest that speaks to the fanaticism now bestowed upon the Timbers and Thorns in the present. The game expanded beyond these pioneering clubs to encompass the formation of new clubs at the scholastic, collegiate, and amateur adult levels in communities across the state. This period offered the opportunity for early adopters of soccer on both participatory and spectator levels to lay roots that have blossomed over time. Last year, after all, marked the 125th anniversary of soccer at the hallowed grounds now known as Providence Park. Soccer enjoyed a long and diverse history in Oregon prior to World War I that remains a vital, if underappreciated, antecedent of the passion that modern-day Oregonians put into the sport on a variety of